Good morning. It's nice to see all your smiling faces. I come from the land of sunshine. The weather is boring. It's usually sunny and 70 degrees. And the surf is always up. And it's called America's finest city, San Diego. But I was a reserve police officer for 8 or 9 years, and I can tell you, I don't know if it was the finest. I think every city has its problems. But I think that God has blessed you people specifically, if this is your home church, because the floods that have happened, the scientists are saying they call this a 1,000-year flood. But insurance policies, if you own a home, they have to figure in a 100-year flood, that every 100 years something's going to flood. A 1,000-year flood. At the same time, the largest hurricane ever recorded by mankind just hit Mexico yesterday. It was moving at 200 miles an hour. The thing was huge, just gobbling up space as it went. In the Old Testament, there are stories. In fact, in the book we're going to be reading from, God steps away, and I think because he's a gentleman, when people don't want him in their life. And when I was 15 years old, I was coming home from school, and a friend from outside our neighborhood drove up in a little pickup truck, and she was the wife of my brother's best friend who was in the Air Force together. And she pulled over, and you know how you live in a hood, you live in a community, you live in a neighborhood, you live in a spot here nearby, and it has its own vibe and its own people. Well, I didn't have a dad. I had a dad, but didn't know him. And my mom was just really a hard-working woman to try to take care of her boys. And so Penny pulled up, and she was out of her hood, because our hood was a few steps down. And just for her to be there caught my attention. And she said, "Is your mother home from work?" I said, "Well, I think so. I'm just getting home from practice. I think it's practice football or something." And so I looked at her face and I said, "Why? What's the matter?" I got in the truck. And she said, "Well, I'll tell you when I talk to your mom." I said, "No, there's something the matter. I want to know right now." And she said, "Well," and I took the keys out of her ignition. And she said, "Well, your brother David was killed 2 hours ago in an automobile accident." And I yelled at her and said, "Don't ever say anything like that to somebody. That's a horrible thing to say." That was my first reaction. And as we talked, she said, "Would you fix your mom some coffee and me? And then when you bring the coffee into the living room, I'll tell your mother, but you should be with her." I said, "All right." Now, we lived in a 2-bedroom apartment. It was $70 a month, and it was probably 250 to 300 square feet, very small. My mom was making $50 a week, I think, at her peak when I was in high school. So I thought, I'll get this coffee done. And just as I took the cup and I started walking to the living room, I can even, as I tell the story, I can see that cup shaking. And all of a sudden, my mother let out a scream that after 45 years of serving the Lord, which I was a zillion miles from him on that day, I've learned that only a mother has the capability of hitting those octaves when she's been told that a child has died. I've done many, many funerals and been with people on the streets and in hospitals dying. I know that whole scene and how it works. I found with men that men, we hold our emotions in a little bit. I've seen dads kick the wall, punch a door, start cussing and yelling or something. But that scream I've heard many times. And in hearing that scream, it always goes to my mother. And I know how to now help that person. I've been where they are. And that night I went down. We were in the second floor of a multiplex and went downstairs. And I remember standing on the sidewalk, and I looked up. It was dark out at this time, and shook my fist and said, "If you're up there, I hate your guts. I'll do everything I can to fight you if you're up there, because you've done nothing good ever for our family." my dad was an alcoholic and an abuser, so my mom, she had to adopt one son. Then she gave me and my brother that's a year older into a foster program. And she was running from the Lord. At 17, she got married. Her mother was a very strong Christian. Her father was a preacher, and he died when she was 4. She's a very beautiful woman, to say the least. She had auburn hair, just out of this world. I remember it being way past her waistline. It was so long and so beautiful. And the men always checked her out when we were shopping or something. And at 17, she said, no, I don't want to go to church. I don't want to be in a youth group. I want to go dance, and I want to be with the boys. So she got married. She married a man that was definitely older than her, and he happened to be wanted for bank robbery. So that marriage didn't work out. And then she married my dad, who was a very handsome guy, and he was an alcoholic. And that didn't work out. And then she married my stepfather, who took us out of the foster care system. And he liked women. And so there was always something going on, and I didn't know what it was. And then one day she came to me when I was in junior high and said, we're going to get divorced. It really kind of upset me, so much so that my oldest brother, this was before he died, had invited me to leave Oregon and come to California and stay with him for a week or two to help comfort me. And then I found out and didn't know. He said, your dad isn't my dad. We're not real brothers. We're half brothers. I said, I never knew that. My mom's never told me that. So that deflated my image of my mom, that she held something back. And I just became when my brother died, he was the only one going to college. He was married. He was in the Air Force. He was a very smart guy. And he was married. They had a beautiful little boy. And he was like the hope out of the ghetto. He was going to college. He was going to become somebody. And I knew that he would look after his mom and he would help us out. So I became very bitter against God. Man, I became a drunk like my dad. At 15, I started drinking. And then before long, my life just went downhill, and I got in trouble after trouble after trouble, and my life was lost. I'd gone to Sunday school, or junior high school, for 2 reasons. One, I loved playing basketball, and our junior high was the best in Portland, and of junior high basketball players, and the best in the YMCA league. And then this Baptist church across the street, the boys from that team said, why don't you come to our church and join our basketball team? They were evangelizing me. I didn't know it. And I said, I'm on 2 teams now, but I wouldn't mind doing that. But it was really because Diane Fazio went to that Baptist church. And when I found out that was the church that Diane went to, I thought, okay. So one Sunday they had missionaries from somewhere. I've been back to that church, and the pastor knows what happened in my life. He's not the same pastor, of course, but 350 kids in the youth group. And they ask everybody to bow their head, and if you would like to accept Jesus, we want you to raise your hand. And when you're finished, you'll go downstairs into your classroom downstairs in the basement. Well, on Sunday nights, there was nobody to take care of the youth. So we basically turned out the lights and ran around downstairs and made friends with everybody, and we weren't being very Christian downstairs. So I thought, oh, that's interesting, go downstairs. This is a morning service. And Diane's hand went up, and it rubbed against my shoulder. I was sitting next to her, and I thought, whoa. She raised her hand. She's going to be going downstairs. I raised my hand. And then the guy said, listen, all of you that raised your hand, we want you to stand up right now as a sign of your faith in Jesus Christ. And I stood up. Diane didn't stand up. Nobody else stood up. It was only me. I was so humiliated and embarrassed. And then they said, go down to your classroom and your teacher will meet you there. And he came down and he was crying. And I said, what are you crying about? And he said, you. I said, me? Yes, you received eternal life today. And I said, I did. Are you sure? He said, let's kneel down. So we knelt down and prayed. And I believe that the Lord accepts our childhood faith, and he accepts our responding, but then it's our part to allow him to cause us to grow. There's only one way you'll grow, and that's to be with him. And the book helps you grow and to know him. I've preached the gospel probably in 50 different nations. I think every nation, every state in our nation, I've seen hundreds of thousands of people come to Jesus. Nothing I was doing. I was just showing up, and he would make the opportunities available. So I had an opportunity. Nobody went to church in my family, and I was the only one. My motives weren't pure. So when my brother died, that was it for me in anything to do with church or God. And I made some really huge mistakes. My drinking got worse. I couldn't just sit down and drink a beer. I had to drink at least a six-pack, if not close to a case. I could not just drink a beer. So since I was a football player and a track guy and a wrestler, I was an athlete, I thought, there's one thing I'd never do is drink. But I can remember at 15, the first time I drank a beer with some friends in high school, peer pressure. And then I said, there's never would I ever smoke pot. And Sunday night again, I remember at Newport Beach, California, a guy came and I didn't know what they were doing. My roommate, they were taking the screens off and doing something with screens in the kitchen, and what they're doing is the marijuana and shaking the seeds out, and I smell it burning. What are you doing? Oh, come on, you can try it. Well, okay. Then I said, oh, there's one thing I'd never do, and that's I'd never take LSD or some chemical. Gosh, it'd be nuts. I didn't get past that, what I'd never do. In fact, one night, it was so bad, I was dropped off at a party by a friend. I had gotten married. My wife and I were married for about 3 years, and she was pregnant with our second child, our son, David. Mindy, our first child, was about 2 years old. And she left me because I was searching for God, and I was into all the weird Eastern philosophies and mysteries of the universe and trying to find God. The church, no way, bunch of hypocrites. And one guy told me one time, said, the only reason the church has hypocrites is because you're there. You're a hypocrite. Everybody is in some way or another. I said, oh, I never thought of it that way before, instead of blaming everybody. But short story, I didn't know he had purchased any of my books. I try not to be promoting. But I like the way Katina said it last night about they had 5 CDs for sale, and one of them went through all the songs, the albums, which one for Christmas, one for this. And he says all the profits go to feed hungry kids, ours. So they're 5 brothers, if you weren't here and heard their concert. And I've known them for many years. They're from Oceanside, California. They're cousins of Junior Seau, who played for the San Diego Chargers. And I used to be their chaplain for a number of years. And they made a comment that between the 5 brothers, they have 18 children. So I told him, wow, it takes 5 Samoans to make 18 children, but only 1 Scotsman to make 26 kids and grandchildren. This last Saturday, I was at a men's conference in Knoxville, and I got a text from my oldest granddaughter. She gave birth to my first great-granddaughter, and that makes our 5th great-granddaughter and 20 grandchildren. But we got divorced with 2 children, and I started just getting higher and more destroyed, and I realized I had done to my 2 children and my wife what my father, whom I hated, did to us. And that just made it worse. Before he died, I saw him maybe at the most 10 times in my life. Before he died at the age of 83, he was still drinking. But I helped him move out of the house that his father built at the turn of the century. And he was living as a recluse up in the attic. He was a very bright person. He worked for Howard Hughes for 50 years of one of his electronic companies. And I went and asked him, did you ever feel guilty of never coming to Kent's or my football games or track meets? You know, my brother was one of the best in the state of Oregon, whatever he did. And he started to cry. And he said, every time I put the bottle to my lips, I felt sorry for him then. And then I said, listen, I am a wicked man. And don't you ever feel guilty about anything concerning me. But God has forgiven me of my sins. And I just want you to know that he forgives you of all your failures. And I hold no animosity against you, though I went to beat him up one time at 16. And you just need the Lord Jesus in your heart. And he prayed with me. And then I came back a year later, made sure he settled. And just to be sure, we prayed again. And he asked the Lord to forgive him of his sins and Jesus to take his life. So when he was dying, he called me on the phone. I couldn't hear too well, but he had boys by another wife. And one of them was listening in. And we talked after the funeral. And he said, you couldn't understand, but what he was saying, you were telling him to be sure that he knows that Jesus Christ is his Lord. And he was mumbling, but he was saying, I know, I understand, I've done that. So here's a guy that went 83 years. He became a drunk. I never knew why until I did our family genealogy. My family is from Ireland and Scotland. My mom's family, all from Ireland. My dad's all from Scotland. So we've got the Irish, the Scotch, and I'm the little soda. And so they're always fighting each other. So my life is always a battle going on inside if I'm Scotch or if I'm Irish. Well, when they met, my mom met him. She was a quote-unquote backslidden Christian girl. Had she been walking with the Lord, she wouldn't have been at that bar or party, wherever it was they met. Bad company corrupts good morals, King Solomon said. It's so important right now as we see the decline of our nation, like every other huge superpower in history, but we've actually given it away. And the bad guys are inside our borders now. I spent 2 trips from February till July in Iraq. And I went specifically with my friend Victor Marks with a team of psychologists and counselors to help the Yazidi girls that were kidnapped, raped, beaten, brutalized, sold more than one time through the sex slave trade. And when I began hearing these stories about ISIS, I realized hell has been unleashed on the earth. When you hear one girl had been raped 30 times between breakfast and lunch on one day. These are inhuman. They are not men. These are animals. And you listen to these teenagers talk, and one said, I said, you don't have to tell me any details. You don't have to tell me a story. What I want to help you with is that your head would be right, that you will make it the rest of your life. And she said, no, I want to tell. And I said, well, okay, but you don't need to be graphic. I want the whole world to know who these people are. And her 14-year-old friend, they both were bought as a weekend slave by 4 men that were stoned and drunk all weekend. And from the minute they paid for them, they started beating them up, got them in submission by Friday night, and then did whatever they wanted the rest of the time. I met a man that is paralyzed today. Mount Sinjar, ISIS had come and was really they just took Nineveh. You know Mosul is Nineveh, Nineveh. This is the first time in over 2,000 years that there's not a Christian witness in Nineveh. Did you know that? The first thing they do is they pay off spies in the neighborhood. And they say, we want to know where all the Christians live and the pastors. And they put a mark. You've all seen it in the news, little half circle with a dot above it. You know what I'm talking about? Like a happy face with a dot. That's the letter N in the Arabic alphabet. And that tells the ISIS guys that a follower of the Nazarene is what they call Jesus of Nazareth. A Nazarene follower is in this house. So they knew right where all the Christians were. And they didn't care if they're 4-year-old boys or 40-year-old men. They chopped their heads off just because they're Christians. And after meeting with many, many members of parliament, governors of 2 districts, the chief of the police of Kurdistan, some really people that know what's really going on. I had to interrupt the Secretary General of the Parliament because I was so overwhelmed, my heart just burst. I said, sir, what you're telling us in this room right now is that ISIS is about genocide against the Christians. All the members of parliament were in that meeting. They said genocide, that's the word. I said, let me just get this straight. Christians are my brothers and sister. I am their brother. And we don't know about this in America, that they're burning the churches to the ground. They're assassinating the pastors and the deacons and the elders and the ushers and anybody that has a visibility. And that's what ISIS is about. And he said, well, IS, Islamic State, IS in Iraq and Syria. And to make an Islamic State, they have to kill all the Christians. Genocide's going on right now, and nobody's speaking up. So that's why I've been twice. It's expensive to go there, to get there for one thing, but then the security you have to have around you, it's expensive. But the people, they're so appreciative that they meet an American who they hate. They hate us. They despise us because of our television and our movies and of all the sex-crazed issues in our society. They don't want it in their society. So that really hurt me that we didn't know. And then on the second trip, an official said, well, Mike, they've just been waiting for the Christians in America to stand up and verbally rebuke them and the governments for not getting them taken care of. And then what? Well, since nobody's speaking out in America, they have people already in America and in Europe. And since nobody's resisting what they're doing until Russia entered the Middle East, fulfilling Ezekiel 37, more than likely, by name, and Iran is there, and Chinese are there dressed as ISIS members, Chinese army. Chinese have sent their one big aircraft carrier over there. Russia has a Typhoon-class submarine that has 20 missiles on it, and each missile has 10 nuclear warheads on it. They can destroy 200 cities just from that submarine, right on the border of Israel. They're after Israel. The Bible tells us that. And Syria butts up against Israel at an area called the Golan Heights. And in 1973, the war that was happening, Israel took over the Golan Heights. The Russians had built a spy station up on top and were eavesdropping on all phone calls and walkie-talkies or whatever. Israel took that over, turned everything around, put more modern equipment in it, and they've been spying and listening to everything for years. So Russia needs the oil, because oil, when it's over $100 a barrel, Russia is wealthy. So the nation's leader came up with a little plan this summer, drop oil to $40, and Putin went, because he knows that if Israel starts tapping the oil, then they will lose business with Europe, because Europe gets most of its gas and oil from Russia. They had discovered what's called Leviathan, the name of the Bible, this big creature from the sea, thousands and thousands of acres off the coast of Israel, full of gas and oil. And Putin has offered Netanyahu to actually let Russia drill all the oil out. We'll pay Israel a royalty, and we will guard the wells so none of the enemies of Israel will bother, because the Russians are protecting it. Wow, that's like letting the chickens dance with a fox or something, isn't it? So you live in a very exciting time, really. The Lord gave us all these warnings, and they're unfolding around us. And I had known of 22 Al-Qaeda training centers here in America that were publicized, actually. Right about the same time that a newspaper in Montana put everybody's address in a list that has a gun in Montana. You know, when you study history, the last two barriers, you take over the education, you take over the politics, you take all these things, you start moving slowly. But when you get to the end, when the Civil War is going to break out, or whatever calamity is designed to make people fall into the hands of the people that have set this up, they go after two groups, and they try their best to destroy the public's image of these two groups and their respect. One of those groups, of course, is military. You are a huge military community. And those of you that are veterans or active duty, we all thank you for your service to our families, that we have freedom because you did something. There's two differences in Knoxville and Lexington that I found out in the last 7 days. At a men's conference for 2 days last week in Knoxville, I was surprised at the majority of the men that were packing, carrying a concealed weapon. And I realized, oh, you're not in the socialist state of California. That's right. You can have a gun easily and all that. And then here, I've met so many military that have talked to me this weekend, and the stories are really frightening. Apparently, you have one of the bigger training camps for ISIS here in South Carolina. And Americans are signing up to fight Americans. Jesus said in the last days there'd be a strong delusion, people just being delusional. And except those days be shortened, all flesh would be destroyed. The world has the enemies of Israel and of the U.S., Iran, China, and Russia, all together on the border of Israel today. This was prophesied. God would put a hook in the jaw of Gog, the leader, the prince of Magog, which is the area of Russia, and Meshach, which at that time is the same exact center of where Moscow is today. And he would turn Russia around. Otherwise, they weren't planning on coming to the Middle East. And God will take them out. They'll come attacking with, they were communist countries, but Muslim countries by name. You know, if you looked at a map today and looked at the paper, you'd see a town in Libya called Benghazi. 2 Navy SEALs from San Diego, California, which we have many, were killed there. If you've watched the Fox channel at all here in the last 3 days, each night they've run the story with Brett Barr by 3 remaining Navy SEALs that said, had our leaders, the government, at least sent an airplane or something to help us, none of these people would have died. Our ambassador or these brave Navy SEALs, they wouldn't have died. So you look at a map on the internet if you want, and you go to Benghazi and you look and you go, oh my goodness. You know what a neighborhood is right next to Benghazi? Cyrene. Do you remember when Jesus was carrying the cross to go up to Golgotha that he was so tired he fell under the weight of the cross? And the soldiers, it says there was a man named Simon from Cyrene coming across the countryside, and the soldiers commanded him to help Jesus carry his cross. He was what we would call a dark-skinned Libyan from Africa. And then Benghazi comes up, and it's right next door. I just see it as something we need to pray for all of our military men, because military bases are being spotted right now. And if you're in uniform, I know you've been warned, you have to watch out. And then the second one that has become so obvious. When you take down a country at street level, before whoever you're going to have come in and take over the streets, you've got to destroy the trust between the community and the police department. We have been blessed because most police departments, there's some bad everywhere, I know that, but they are there to serve and protect. And now we see people assassinating police officers. At Ground Zero at 9/11, I was honored with a very high security clearance to be part of a special plane disaster team. And I was given a gold badge in front of the chief of police, Joseph Esposito, and the police commissioner by the president of Police Officers for Christ at a breakfast for the work I did helping with the cops, especially to help counsel them, help them. I love law enforcement. I have 2 uncles that have retired. I have a half-brother that's retired. And it's a hard job. It's a dirty job. It's an ugly job with bad memories, good times, maybe. But now to have the worry that somebody's going to bring out their iPhone or their Android and try to make it look like you're a bad person, or to spin something, or to know that police officers sitting in their cars are getting popped. It's crazy. Our country has gone crazy. So follow me before we go home, here in just a few verses of the second shortest book in the Bible, in the Old Testament. Do you know what book this is, anybody? Does anybody know what the first one is? The shortest Old Testament. The Beatles wrote a hit tune named after it. Obadiah. Obladi, oblada. Right? Well, it's close, just to help you remember. 21 verses in Obadiah. God can speak in a short message, or he can give you Isaiah and Ezekiel, and he can speak about the future in a long message. These people, the Israelites, have turned from God. He had blessed them. The closer they got, their nation prospered. They walked away from God, like many of our leaders that make decisions are making godless decisions. They're politically good for them, but godless for the nation. And now we see in this little book of Haggai, it is very short. It's only 38 verses. And something happens in the first 2 weeks of the first month of the year. And God talks to us through the prophet. He tells the prophet, this is how the people think. So now we get to see that God knows how we think as a nation and as a family and as an individual. But yet God gives people an opportunity to repent of their sins. And so I'd like to pray that God would bless your ears and your heart right now, and that you would let Jesus be number one in your life. Your marriage isn't going to make it. I was blessed to be given back my wife when she saw that I was a born-again man. She gave her heart to Jesus. Her father and her mother gave their hearts to Jesus. My mother read the Bible every night from 1932 to 1972. And she accepted Jesus because we invited her to come and stay with us on our vacation. And I took her to church those 2 Sundays. And one day, I said, you need to meet Pastor Chuck Smith. And he shook her hand, and he had this smile that would go from Florida to Maine. Just beautiful smile and a real loving, warm heart towards people. And my mother said these words. He was holding her hand, shaking it, and says, my son sure loves you. And he took her other hand with that beautiful smile from heaven and said, well, we sure love your son. What Chuck didn't know she was saying, my son loves you, is that this young man I have raised, I had to give him away. I got him back. We've lived a really rough life. This guy has been a troubled boy, a troubled teenager, a fighter, a scrapper, a troublemaker. He has never submitted to authority in his life. That's what my mom was saying. My son sure loves you. She saw her son was changed, and that led her to the Lord. So we moved her to San Diego. At 60 years old, she retired. She started praying. An interesting thing is that she began training women how to pray. My grandmother was a true prayer intercessor. And my mother, who despised the church and the old lady kind of a Christian prayer group, becomes everything she didn't want to be and was totally at peace. She had a 4-way bypass. The doctor said she'll live 5 years. She lived another 13. She died 2 weeks short of 92. So she had Alzheimer's, and I'd go in and talk to her, and one day she asked if I'd seen me. Have you seen Michael? I said, no. Yeah, I have. Where is he? He's closer than you think. Do you live in this neighborhood? My mom had a great wit. And I said, yeah, I'm about a mile away from here. Oh, is this a safe place? Oh, very safe. Yeah, there's no crime where you are. It's a safe place. Oh. Can I read the Bible with you? Of course. So I'd always read Scripture, and we would always pray, and that's how we communicated. So I read the story about Abram being 100 years old and Sarah being 90 years old and giving birth to the promised child, Isaac. And it just hit me. My mom's 2 weeks short here of being 92 years old. Hey, Mom, what do you think about this? What do I think about what? About this story we're reading. Well, what about it? Well, it just dawned on me that Abram's wife is basically your age. You know, this is a miracle. What? Well, that she's 90 years old and delivering a baby. What do you think about that? And she got so indignant with her face and huffy. She went, well, I don't think they would allow that around here. I said, okay, that's good. Okay, let's see what we have. In the 2nd year of Darius the king, on the 1st day of the 6th month, the word of the Lord came by the prophet Haggai to Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, the governor of Judah, and to Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest. And this was the message. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, this people says, this is what they're thinking, the time has not come, even the time for the house of the Lord to be rebuilt. That's what they're thinking. And let me ask you a question. You understand that's a bad attitude? The people are saying what they're going to do, like a person that goes Christmas and Easter to church maybe. A person that has money, but they never ever support the work of a church or of a school. Or your church is giving 2 or 3 truckloads of food, clothing, furniture now. I was told that you're delivering to Manning and Summerton, South Carolina. That's a wonderful sign of a church that's alive, that people are giving. But there comes a time that some people say, this is my time. I've got taxes to pay. They make up excuses of why they can't see things happening in the house of the Lord. So this is the attitude, and it's a bad attitude. They had turned from God, and that's what gives that attitude. They had walked away from him. And then the word of the Lord came by Haggai the prophet, and it said, is it time for you people, you yourselves, to dwell in your comfortable paneled luxury homes while this house lies desolate? So God reasons with people that have bad attitudes. And that's a good question. I can live comfortably, but the church is suffering. But the church isn't necessarily suffering. It's the people around the church that the church was designed by God to love and to help. I've been in enough disasters, and let me give you this example. I wrote a book, When Your World Falls Apart. And I was asked by a publisher when I came back from 9/11, would I write a book about the experiences? So I wrote a book using the principles of a major disaster of 4 sections. You divide that into, and you start working through it. But I use it as spiritual. I saw so much ugliness at Oklahoma City. I did not want to go to ground zero. Though I was a member of an 8-person team, licensed, contracted by the Red Cross through a resolution by the Congress of the United States of America, that if an American citizen or their loved one is killed or injured in an American flag-carrying aircraft, that person and their loved ones have the right to spiritual care. That was a resolution that Congress passed, not a law, a resolution, and they never did anything with it. And then, a little after a year or so, there was a crash off of Boston where the pilot was a Muslim and he committed suicide and killed all the people on the plane. Now, there's a rule of thumb in an aircraft disaster that for every 1 person that dies, 10 people of that person's family or just loved ones from work or friends or college mates or something, 10 people will come to the city, the area, but they want to be at the crash site. They need that for closure. 250 people died on that Boston disaster. However, there were Christians, there were Jewish people, and they knew what death and burial protocol was about, but they did not know Muslim protocol. So they handpicked 26 of us, 6 members of the Coast Guard were there. The other 20 of us, you had to be a law enforcement chaplain, trained in critical incident stress management, and have at least a master's degree. So the FBI and the NTSB and the FAA and different agencies took us aside in Charleston for a week, all day long into the evenings, and trained us. So I thought you had to leave signing when you would volunteer. And I thought, I'm going to volunteer in September because there'll be no rain, no hail, no sleet, no freezing winds anywhere in the country in September. Well, 9/11 came. And I got a call from Washington, D.C. I had my pager, and they said, do you have your television on? I said, no. I said, turn it on and get here to New York City as quickly as you can and report such and such. So there's 8 of us on a team. We were responsible for the media and an air crash disaster, the Family Assistance Center. There's another area we had was training local ministers. Like only 4 of us made it. I was responsible for the morgue, that on the first Friday, there was 1 cooler truck for body parts and bodies, and in about 4 or 5 days, there was 10 or 12. The pain that people still have that were first responders, some have committed suicide. The dignity as an American, I'm saying this as an American, I was there, and there were 3 blocks of cops from around the country that surrounded the medical examiner's office. And it was such a huge job, even though that was a multi-storied building, it had to all be done outside. You didn't get into that area. I had a identification clearance that let me go anywhere in New York City, day or night, talk to anybody, be anywhere except in the same room with the mayor and the governor at the same time. I could be with the mayor or I could be with the governor, but not when they're together. That was the only hindrance of what I was doing there. They allowed me to handpick police chaplains from around the country to take 4-hour shifts a day because it was so tense. But when an ambulance came, you'd hear the sirens, blocks off. You'd see the cops all tense up, and then the doctors, and they'd open up the rings of security. They'd come in. I'd just lay my hand on the ambulance and say a prayer. All the cops would start crying. They'd salute. They treated the deceased with such dignity. You would have been proud to have been an American. There was dignity. A war was unleashed on us that day. And it's more a spiritual war than it is just a physical war. It's an evil war from hell to destroy this nation and to destroy the churches and to just get people not to trust anymore. You and I are the solution to the problem. Unless America, within, I would say, between now and Christmas, a revival breaks out, next year at this time, you'll be shocked at what takes place. If my people, he didn't say if all the people in the world gather, just my people would seek my face and humble themselves and pray. If my people, then I'll heal this land. I'll hear them from heaven. I'll heal it. We're in a very serious position. But when the attitude is bad among God's people, the nation fails. So it's very important that Haggai goes to these people, and extremely important that verse 1 is there because it tells you the day that he went for God. Now, therefore you say, the Lord of hosts, thus saith the Lord, consider your ways. 5 times in 38 verses, God says to the people, consider what you're doing. Consider how you're thinking. Consider what you're doing to yourself and to your family. Consider, stop, think, use your mind. Anybody in their right mind knows that marijuana is not a good thing. If you've never smoked it, you don't want to. But our country has gone so far, and we're so bankrupt, that we're legalizing it. Now, that's the last thing you want when there's a war going on, to have all the people buzzed out in their heads all day and night. Boy, in Colorado, I know a lot of police officers in Colorado, and especially in the state police. There are so many accidents. I think it's getting more than alcohol. Accidents, people dying and overdosing, all because an enemy says, yeah, this is good for you. You won't think correctly. And when the bigger plan comes, you'll be so out of it, you won't even know or care. And you'll just have a noose around your neck, and you'll be led as slaves. So when a nation isn't considering their ways, stupid things start happening. You have sown much. Have you ever done that? You feel like you've really worked hard, but you harvest little. You've done that before, I'm sure. Seems like you've worked all day and you've got a part-time job and you're just not making any forward progress. But there is not enough. You eat and you're never satisfied. You drink, but there's not enough to become drunk. You put on clothing, but no one is warm enough. And he who earns wages to put into a purse with holes in it. You ever felt like that? You worked all week, you get your paycheck, you put it in the bank, and it's like a purse, and somebody has cut the bottom out, and by Tuesday, you're out of money. What? Where did it go? Man, I'm going to have to get a third job. Thus saith the Lord of hosts. Consider your ways, ladies and gentlemen. Go up to the mountains and bring wood and rebuild the temple. Work on my house instead of yours, that I may be pleased with it and that I be glorified, saith the Lord. You look for so much. Now that's something we all have in common. We have high expectations. But I know that when you have your expectations and they aren't met and people let us down, there comes a time in our life where we just don't have expectations anymore. We are not considering our ways. We just know that we can't trust people. We get hurt by people. So we self-medicate ourselves, be it by alcohol or by legal or illegal chemicals or zigzags. It's wrong. We've turned away from God to things that are not satisfying us. The internet is so full of sickness. I could not, in a mixed company like this, tell you the things the girls told me about ISIS men. You know, you hear vaguely that something went on, ISIS was raping girls or something. Not only raping them, but they would chop their head off when they're finished with them. They were like, there's no value. These two teenage girls I was talking about, they were bought by the first four guys. They were stoned. They beat the girls up. They spent 4 or 5 days with them, and the girls escaped twice, which is very cool. And these men were animals, as if a woman is not somebody special. No value of human life whatsoever. To come into America and let all their people pop up that are already planted here, unbelievable of what they will do to the Christians. Unbelievable. You've sown much, you have little, you have great expectations. You look for much, but nothing comes. It's only little. And when you bring it home, I blow it away. Why, declares the Lord of hosts? Because of my house, which lies desolate, while each of you runs to your own house. You're being selfish. Therefore, because of you, the sky has withheld its dew, and the earth has withheld its produce. And across America, our farms are closing down. The production of food has slowed down. Truckers know that there's not very much left, that they're going to have to start stopping, not in the inner cities where the warehouses are, because of the food riots. I had a friend who was the president of California Truckers Association for many years. He had 65 trucks going the whole time, a multi-millionaire. And he said, we all know what's coming. The people don't know it. In the very heart of California, you have the San Joaquin Valley. Produces most of the food for America. It's been shut down by environmentalists because of a little silver fish that nobody sees. And they cannot use the water to make things grow. They got to spare this little silver whatever it is. And farms in California, down, Iowa, Ohio, Nebraska, Colorado, the feeding trough is getting pretty sparse right now. Big chains are changing hands, and we had a major chain buy another major chain in California, and in our part of California, another major chain came from out of state and bought the same store change, and all of a sudden, that one went broke and closed down all the stores they had opened in California just this last week or two. I'm warning you. A drought is a sign of God's judgment. A flood is a sign of God's judgment. Not that he's being mean, but when people say we don't want you and they have a bad attitude, God is a gentleman, and he will step away. And he gives us a chance. Draw near to God, and he'll draw near to you. So reverse that. Get away from God, and he'll get away from you. So look what happens here. He says you have these expectations. People let you down. You look for a lot, you get little. Therefore, because of you, all these things have come. I've called for a drought on the land and on the mountains, on your grain that you're growing, on your new wine, on the oil, on what the ground produces, on men, on cattle, and on all the labor of your hands. And then Zerubbabel, the son of Shealtiel, and Joshua, the son of Jehozadak, the high priest, with all the remnant of the people, like we're a remnant of the people. They obeyed the voice of the Lord, their God. And the words of Haggai, the prophet, as the Lord, their God, had sent him. And the people showed reverence unto the Lord. The word reverence is, in a sense, awe, respect. I want to ask you a personal question that you don't need to answer to anybody. When was the last time you told God you loved him? When was the last time you thanked Jesus that he took death so that you would never taste death? Billy Graham has a very good friend, Dr. John Wesley White. He is an associate evangelist. And John and I became friends. He was the first Christian book author that I ever read. And I met him at one of Billy's schools of evangelism. And then I was able to teach at those schools, and I got to know John Wesley White. He has 2 PhDs. He's a brilliant-minded man, Oxford. He had a stroke, and he had a slur in his speech, and he couldn't read very well. And he started in Genesis, memorizing the whole Bible, and it brought his mind back. He was asked, John, in the Bible it says, we shall not all die, but we shall be changed in a moment, in a twinkling of an eye. For the Lord himself shall descend from heaven with the shout and the sound of the trumpet, and the dead in Christ will rise first, and those of us that are alive and remain shall always be with him. What does that word mean, that will be changed in a twinkling of an eye? He said, that's interesting. I wrote a paper on that. I studied it for mathematics, physics, everything. I looked at it. You know what a twinkling of an eye is? It is not a blink of an eye. When Jesus calls you, it's not a blink. It's not a gesture. He said twinkle. The closest he could get to define it is 1/1,000,000th of a second. That's how quickly you will leave your body. You won't feel pain. Sometimes you hear of accidents and people, that could just be their body responding. God's not torturing anybody. In 1/1,000,000th of a second, your eyes are closed, and there you are in heaven. Aren't you looking forward to that day? I just hope, like I love sports, I love baseball. I hope that I can just run up to the gate where Peter's supposed to be standing, and I just slide in, and he goes, safe. You know, just to get in is too much. So I leave you today with this thought about our country and about God speaking to groups of people in an hour or in several years. Haggai talked to them, And the people showed reverence. And look at the close. Haggai, the messenger of the Lord, spoke by commission of the Lord to the people, saying, I am with you, declares the Lord. God is with us. And if we will all join together from here to San Diego, up to Seattle, and back over to Portland, Maine, and we would get serious that God's house is laying in waste and nobody is standing up for it, our enemy's going to come in. They're going to desecrate the house of God. It was such an honor to be with all these 500 men this weekend and to hear the stories from the men from U-Turn, to hear the stories of marriages being restored. One couple, the man was telling me last night, they've been apart for 4 years now. And his wife was getting ready to get married. And the Lord spoke to him about something, and they got talking, and she dropped the other guy. They're off to the Bahamas for their wedding, and they're getting married 2 weeks from yesterday, after 4 years of divorce. That's right here in Lexington. That's a miracle. That's God Almighty, who is for the family. I hate divorce, saith the Lord. Here he says, I am with you. If you will come to my house, I'm with you. And if you'll let your love and my love flow out of this house, I'm with you. Manning thanks God for Calvary Chapel, Lexington. Somerton thanks God for you people that drop some money into the offering. Hey, drop it all in and watch what happens. There's a man, Mr. Letourneau. He was behind Caterpillar and Deere equipment. He gave 90% of his money away and kept 10%. He gave God 90% and kept 10%, and he's a multimillionaire. His family's still living off the royalties. You can't outgive God. It's always the right time to do something with God. Well, when is it the right time to build the Lord's house or to buy my house or whatever? Wow. Not when there are people being tortured in the name of their God, and they're doing it to my sisters and my brothers. We're talking 5-year-old boys and girls up to 24. Not just teenage girls. And this is the close. I'm with you. And it says, on the 24th day, the last verse of 15, on the 24th day of the 6th month, in the 2nd year of Darius the king, the Lord of hosts revealed himself. If you look at the first verse and the 15th, you will realize only 23 days passed from them being self-centered and selfish, more concerned about their comfort than their neighborhood or their gathering at the temple. And when they repented and they prayed and they sought God's face, in 23 days, a huge revival broke out in that country that was just mediocre. You know what? Jesus said, what good is the salt if it loses its savor? You are the salt of the earth. But what good is the salt if it loses its savor? And then he says, it's good for nothing but to be cast down and trodden under feet of men. And that's what's happening to Christians in America. We have been salt that lost its savor as a church nationwide. It's down on the ground. They're talking against us. They're doing things against us. And I was a good for nothing for 26 years. There's no way I'll go to my grave without being good for something, since I have Jesus living inside of me. You're not a good for nothing, are you? We need to stand up for our faith. And we need to speak out for those that are too weak to speak for themselves. And God will honor you, men. He'll honor you, women. He will bless you. He'll protect you. God bless you, and thank you for your patience this morning. It's been a joy to just come onto this camp. As soon as I drove up Friday, I said, this is home. This is like home. The Holy Spirit is here. Take advantage of it, because the Lord is coming very soon. God bless.